The courtroom was colder than expected, both in temperature and atmosphere. 9-year-old Lily sat quietly next to her mother, Rachel, at the plaintiff's table. Her small hands tucked neatly into the thick fur of her golden retriever, Max, trembled only slightly. Max didn't move. He simply leaned his weight gently against her, his warm body a living shield. Lily hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Not since the night her father, Greg, had slammed the door and taken the shouting. With him, she didn't cry that night. She just stopped talking. Now, here they were inside a courtroom that smelled of coffee and old paper, with high ceilings and a silence that carried weight. Rachel's custody case was just one of many that Judge Alan Monroe had seen this month. To him, it was routine. But from the moment he looked down from his bench and saw the child and the dog sitting together, something tugged at his attention. Lily's silence wasn't the kind that came from defiance or confusion. It was a silence filled with understanding like. She'd already heard everything before and chosen to listen no more. Judge Monroe narrowed his eyes and scanned the court. "Is the animal a registered support dog?" he asked, even though the documents in front of him confirmed it. Double quotes, "Yes, Your Honor," Rachel answered quickly. "Max is her certified emotional support animal. He's trained." The judge nodded, then looked at Lily. She didn't look back. The hearing began. Greg, Lily's father, sat on the other side of the courtroom with his lawyer. His face was tight with irritation, his suit slightly wrinkled. He tapped his pen repeatedly on the table as the first witness, a school counselor, spoke about Lily's withdrawal, how she refused to speak in class, and how only Max could comfort her. "She communicates with him in her own way," the counselor said, "with gestures, expressions, even eye contact. It's not formal sign language, but it's consistent and meaningful." Lily sat still through it all, her fingers lightly scratching behind Max's ear. Then, quietly, she raised her left hand and gave a small, gentle motion, an open palm to her chest, then a tap on Max's paw. Instantly, Max shifted position and placed his paw on her knee. Judge Monroe blinked. That wasn't random. He scribbled something down on his notepad. "Did anyone else see that?" he asked aloud. A few people in the courtroom murmured. Rachel nodded, smiling slightly. That was her asking Max to stay close. It means she's nervous. "And he understands her?" the judge asked. Rachel's voice was steady. "He always does." Greg rolled his eyes and leaned into his microphone. "Come on. That dog's not a translator. She needs a real adult, not some fur-covered babysitter." Max's head lifted slightly. He stared across the room at Greg. Lily didn't flinch. She simply gave Max another signal, a tiny movement with her fingers. Max turned away from Greg and resumed his position beside her, pressing against her leg. The judge leaned back in his chair, suddenly more interested than before. He'd seen emotional support animals before, but never one so clearly attuned to a child's unspoken language. He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Let's take a short recess," he said unexpectedly. 10 minutes. He rose and exited the courtroom. Everyone looked at one another, confused. Lily remained seated. She glanced at Max and gave him a soft pat on the head. Max responded with a quiet sigh and nestled in. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal arguments. It had become a space where a silent girl and her dog were telling a story, one gesture at a time, and everyone had just started to listen. Asterisk. The 10-minute recess stretched longer than anyone expected. Judge Alan Monroe retreated to his chambers, still thinking about the subtle, silent exchange he'd witnessed between Lily and Max. In his 30 years on the bench, he had presided over countless custody battles, many emotional, some bitter, all exhausting in their own ways. But never had he seen something quite like this. A little girl who barely spoke, yet clearly communicated volumes with a dog. Back in the courtroom, whispers buzzed among the spectators. Rachel took a deep breath and knelt beside Lily. "Sweetheart, you did great," she whispered softly. Lily's fingers moved lightly over Max's fur, signaling a quiet thank you to her mother. Max looked up at Lily with intelligent eyes, as if understanding the gravity of the day. Judge Monroe returned, his expression softer than before. He tapped the microphone gently. "Before we continue," he said, "I want to understand this bond better." He motioned to the court-appointed therapist, Dr. Helen Carter, to approach. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her calm presence filling the room. "Your Honor," she began, "Lily suffers from selective mutism, a condition where a child cannot speak in certain social situations due to anxiety or trauma. She's been silent for nearly a year." The judge nodded slowly. "And Max? Max is not just a pet," Dr. Carter explained. "He's a trained therapy dog. But more importantly, Lily has developed a unique, personal way of communicating. With him, a series of hand signals and gestures. They understand each other on a deep level. Max reacts to her emotional state, providing comfort and security when words fail her." Lily, sitting quietly, raised her hand again and made the same small sign from before, a flat palm over her chest, then a tap on Max's paw. Immediately, Max placed his paw on her knee and leaned in close. The judge's eyes softened. This is extraordinary," he murmured. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "He saved her more than once," she said. "Once at school, Lily had a panic attack. Max alerted a teacher by pressing an emergency button with his paw. That dog's more than support. He's her voice when she can't speak." Greg scoffed from the other side of the courtroom. "Animals can't replace real parenting. What good is a dog if she can't even talk to her own father?" Judge Monroe fixed his gaze on Greg. The man's frustration was clear, but the judge's decades of experience told him this wasn't about discipline or parenting styles. It was about trust, love, and healing. As Greg continued his arguments, Max subtly shifted position, standing protectively between Lily and her father. The dog's silent presence spoke louder than any words Greg used. The judge called for order. "Let us proceed with caution," he said firmly. "This case is about much more than custody. It's about a child's well-being." Outside the courtroom, reporters waited eagerly for updates. But no one wanted to speak to Lily or Max. For now, their story was quiet, spoken through gestures, looks, and a dog's unwavering loyalty. Judge Monroe leaned back in his chair, feeling a rare sense of responsibility. The law could protect children in many ways, but some truths required listening beyond words. He glanced once more at Lily and Max. In their silence, he sensed a truth the courtroom had yet to fully understand. The courtroom settled back into a heavy silence as Greg rose to take the stand. His face was tense, a flicker of frustration flashing in his eyes as he adjusted his tie. He looked around the room, then locked eyes briefly with Lily, who sat quietly beside Max, her hands folded in her lap. "I don't understand why everyone's making such a fuss over a dog," Greg said sharply. His voice echoed off the high courtroom walls. "She needs discipline. She needs a father who can teach her responsibility, not a furry crutch that lets her hide behind silence." His words hit the room like a sudden chill. Rachel's jaw tightened, and Lily's small fingers twitched. Max stiffened beside her, his golden eyes locked on Greg as if warning him to back off. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of disagreement. Judge Monroe raised a hand, calling for order. "Mr. Davis, please. Stick to the facts." Greg exhaled, his eyes darting around. "I'm saying that this dog, this Max, is a distraction. Lily needs to learn how to speak, to interact with people. If she keeps relying on the dog, she never moved past this silence. Dr. Carter stepped forward once more, her calm voice slicing through the tension. Your Honor, selective mutism is a serious psychological condition. It's not a choice, nor is it simply about discipline. Max is a vital part of Lily's progress. He provides her with a safe way to communicate, which she otherwise cannot. Greg scoffed. Therapists can say whatever they want, but I'm the father. I know what's best for my daughter. Lily shifted in her seat and quietly raised her hand, making a subtle but firm sign. Max immediately responded, standing in front of her protectively and letting out a soft, controlled bark. The courtroom fell silent, all eyes on the dog, and the girl. Judge Monroe watched carefully. Mr. Davis, your daughter's emotional safety is at the center of this case. I would ask you to consider that Max's role might be more crucial than you realize. Greg's lips pressed into a thin line. He opened his mouth to reply, but the judge raised a hand again, silencing him. Let's hear more about this relationship, the judge said. Ms. Turner, would you please share more about how Max supports Lily? Rachel nodded and rose. Her voice wavered slightly as she spoke, but her eyes never left Lily's. Max isn't just a pet. He's Lily's guardian. The day Lily stopped speaking was the day everything changed for our family. At school, at home, in public, Max helps her navigate a world that can be frightening. When she has a panic attack, Max senses it before she does. He knows her signs, her fears, and he responds. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet. We have some videos to show how Max and Lily communicate, she said. The courtroom darkened as the screen lit up. The first clip showed Lily laughing softly as she used her hands to signal Max. The dog responded instantly, wagging his tail and fetching her favorite ball. Another clip showed Max alerting a teacher by pawing at an emergency button during one of Lily's anxiety episodes. A hush fell over the room. No one looked away. Judge Monroe's eyes glistened. This bond, he said quietly, is extraordinary. Greg sat back down, defeated but still unconvinced. His gaze lingered on Lily, who didn't flinch but gave Max a small sign of reassurance. Max nuzzled her hand. The judge called for a brief recess. The case was far from over, but the message was clear. This dog was more than a pet. Max was Lily's lifeline. The courtroom was hushed as the proceedings resumed. Tension still lingered in the air after the powerful video evidence Rachel had presented. Judge Monroe leaned forward in his chair, his attention unwavering. Greg Davis's expression was grim. His frustration was palpable, but there was something else too, an edge of uncertainty creeping in as the courtroom slowly shifted in Lily and Max's favor. Greg stood once again, his voice firmer now, but with a hint of desperation. I want to make one thing clear. I love my daughter. I want to be there for her, not a stranger in her life. But I don't believe sheltering her behind a dog will help her grow. She needs to face the world, to speak, to be heard without hiding. Max, sensing the rising tension, shifted his position immediately. His eyes stayed locked on Greg, his posture alert and protective. Lily's small fingers moved quickly in a series of signs, a unique language only Max seemed to fully understand. Max reacted instantly, moving to stand directly between Lily and her father. The courtroom gasped softly. Judge Monroe's gaze sharpened. Mr. Davis, he said calmly, you must understand that Lily's safety and emotional well-being come first, and from what we have seen, Max is not just a companion, he is her shield. Greg's voice rose, defensive and quick. I'm not the villain here. You don't know what I've been through. I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. At that moment, the gallery was silent, except for the soft scratching of a pen as the judge took notes. The contrast was striking. A man pleading to regain control, and a child who could only communicate through signs and the gentle loyalty of her dog. Rachel rose to speak again, her voice steady but filled with quiet strength. Your Honor, Greg's outbursts have caused Lily to retreat into herself. Max's presence calms her in ways no human can. I've seen it firsthand. Max senses when she's scared and uses his own trained behaviors to protect her. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Has there ever been an incident involving Mr. Davis that might have contributed to Lily's withdrawal? Rachel hesitated briefly, but then said firmly, there was one night when Greg raised his voice loudly during his visit. Lily was so frightened she refused to speak for days after. Lily's eyes darted briefly to her father, who avoided her gaze. Judge Monroe glanced down at his notes, then looked back up. This court must consider what environment will best foster Lily's healing and growth. Suddenly, Lily raised her hand again and signed a swift, clear signal. Max responded immediately, sitting protectively in front of her, ears perked. The courtroom watched the silent exchange with bated breath. Judge Monroe cleared his throat and addressed the court. The protective bond between Lily and Max cannot be ignored. The dog's role in her well-being is as significant as any human guardian's. Greg's jaw tightened. His face flushed with frustration, but the judge's words echoed in the silent courtroom. Lily's mother reached down and gently squeezed her daughter's hand. Lily gave Max a quiet pat on the head, as if silently telling him, "Thank you for staying by me." The judge glanced at the clock. Let us take a short recess. I want to review some additional materials and speak privately with Miss Turner and her daughter. As the courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs spread like wildfire. People were talking about more than custody now. They were talking about a child and her dog who spoke a language the world was just beginning to understand. Max stayed close to Lily, his calm presence a silent promise of safety in a world that still felt uncertain. Judge Monroe's gaze lingered on the pair as they left the courtroom. He knew this case would be unlike any other he had ever presided over. The courtroom settled back into a solemn quietness as Rachel rose once more. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of hope and fatigue. For months, she had carried the weight of her daughter's pain and the constant fear that the law might not recognize what Max truly meant to Lily. I want to share something the court has not seen before, Rachel began, voice steady but soft. She reached into her bag and pulled out her tablet, the screen lighting up in the dim room. These are videos from our home and school, moments showing how Max and Lily communicate. The room darkened as the video played. The first clip was a candid shot of Lily sitting on the floor in their living room, her fingers moving gracefully in a series of gestures. Max sat patiently beside her, his eyes fixed on her hands. When she made a specific sign, Max's tail wagged excitedly, and he fetched a small ball she had tossed earlier. The next clip was more intense. At school, Lily began to tremble, her breathing shallow. Max noticed immediately and pressed his nose against her hand. Lily's fingers signaled rapidly, and Max responded by nudging the teacher, who followed Max's gaze to Lily's trembling form. Moments later, Max's paw pressed a nearby emergency button, summoning help. The teacher comforted Lily until she calmed. The courtroom was silent. Even Greg's lawyer watched the footage without comment. Rachel paused the video and looked up. Max is more than a pet. He's Lily's lifeline. He senses her fears before she even understands them herself. Without him, she would be lost in a world that feels too loud, too scary. Judge Monroe's eyes glistened with unshed tears. This evidence is compelling, he said quietly. It reveals a bond far deeper than companionship. Greg's face was a mask of frustration. He stood to object, but the judge raised his hand to silence him. This court will consider all evidence carefully, Judge Monroe said firmly. Lily, who had been watching quietly, suddenly reached out to Max. Her fingers traced the familiar sign she had used earlier, a flat palm to the chest, followed by a tap on Max's paw. Max responded by resting his head on her knee, offering comfort without a word. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Rachel continued softly, "Lily's silence is not defiance. It's trauma. She communicates with Max because he listens in ways others cannot. They've built a language of trust and love." The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Turner. Your testimony and the videos provide vital insight into Lily's world." The courtroom murmured quietly, the weight of the story settling over everyone present. Judge Monroe glanced at the clock. "We will recess until tomorrow morning to allow the court to review all submitted materials. I intend to meet privately with Miss Turner and her daughter to understand their needs more fully." As the session adjourned, Lily leaned close to Max, whispering a silent thank you. The dog licked her cheek, a gentle reminder of his unwavering presence. Rachel gathered her belongings, her heart pounding with a fragile hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, the court was beginning to truly see Lily not as a silent child, but as a brave girl with an extraordinary bond. Outside the courthouse, reporters scrambled for statements. But Rachel politely declined. This story wasn't ready for the world just yet. Judge Monroe, sitting alone later that evening, reviewed the video clips on his laptop. He shook his head slowly, a rare smile breaking through his usual stern demeanor. Sometimes justice came not just from words spoken aloud, but from silent connections that spoke louder than any testimony. The next morning dawned cool and gray, the courthouse buzzing softly with anticipation. Inside the courtroom, an air of expectancy hung heavy. Everyone sensed this day might bring a turning point, something none of them would soon forget. Judge Monroe called the session to order. "Before we proceed, I would like to speak privately with Lily and her mother," he announced gently. Rachel gave a reassuring nod, and Lily's hand slipped into Max's thick fur. Slowly, the two rose and followed the bailiff down a quiet hallway, the echoes of footsteps fading behind them as the courtroom waited in tense silence. In the judge's chambers, the atmosphere was intimate and calm. Sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the worn wooden desk. Max settled on the floor beside Lily, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm. Judge Monroe looked kindly at Lily, his voice gentle. "Lily, I want you to know this is a safe place. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, but I'm here to listen whenever you're ready." Lily's eyes met his, wide and unsure. She glanced at Max, then back at the judge. Slowly, she raised her hand, her fingers moving through the familiar sequence of signs, a silent language she had trusted for so long. The judge watched attentively, following each movement. Then, after a quiet pause, Lily surprised everyone. Her lips parted, and she whispered, "Max knows I'm safe." The room fell utterly silent. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in Judge Monroe's eyes. Even Max seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, resting his head on Lily's knee. Lily looked down shyly, a small smile touching her lips. For the first time in over a year, she had spoken not loudly, not boldly, but with fragile courage. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Lily. That means more than you know." Outside the chambers, Rachel wiped away tears. "She's been waiting for this moment," she whispered. Back in the courtroom, word spread quickly once Lily returned. Spectators, attorneys, and court staff alike exchanged glances filled with awe and hope. The little girl who had not spoken in months had found her voice again. Greg sat stiffly, his face pale. He tried to interject, but Judge Monroe raised a hand. "Let us respect Lily's courage today." Throughout the day, Lily continued to communicate with Max and those around her, sometimes through sign, sometimes with quiet words. Her presence began to soften the courtroom, turning tension into empathy. Later, during a break, Judge Monroe requested a private conversation with Lily and Rachel once more. He wanted to understand, not just the facts, but the feelings behind them. As Lily leaned against Max, she whispered softly, "I want to be safe. I want to be heard." The judge smiled gently. "You will be, Lily. This court will do everything to make sure of it." That day marked a turning point, not just in the case, but in Lily's life. A fragile voice had broken through silence, carried on the strength of a dog's love, and the courtroom would never be the same. After the courtroom adjourned for the day, Judge Monroe invited Lily and her mother, Rachel, to his chambers for a private conversation. The judge wanted to hear directly from Lily and gain a deeper understanding of her world. Inside the cozy chamber, sunlight filtered softly through the blinds. Max lay quietly by Lily's feet, occasionally lifting his head to look at her with gentle eyes. Lily sat on the edge of the chair, her fingers nervously twisting a small bracelet on her wrist. Judge Monroe spoke kindly. "Lily, I want to know. What makes you feel safe and happy? You don't have to use words if you don't want to. You can speak in any way you like." Lily looked at Max, then at the judge. Slowly, she raised her hand and signed a series of gestures. The judge watched intently, recognizing a few signs he had seen before during the trial. She then whispered softly, "I don't like it when Dad yells. It scares me. But Max stays close and helps me feel safe." Her voice trembled and tears glistened in her eyes. Judge Monroe nodded with empathy. "That sounds very hard, Lily, but you're very brave." Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. "Lily has been through so much. Max is her anchor. Without him, she wouldn't be able to navigate the world as she does." The judge turned to Max, gently placing his hand on the dog's head. Max leaned into the touch, eyes warm and trusting. "I see how important Max is to you," the judge said softly. "He's not just a dog, he's part of your family." Lily smiled faintly and gave Max a light pat. "He understands me," she whispered. Judge Monroe took a deep breath. "I want you to know that this court will do everything possible to keep you safe and to help you grow. Your voice matters, even when you're silent." The words seemed to settle in the room like a balm. Lily's shoulders relaxed slightly, and a small flicker of hope shone in her eyes. As the conversation drew to a close, the judge stood and smiled gently. "Thank you for sharing with me, Lily. You're incredibly strong." Outside the chambers, Rachel exhaled deeply. She looked down at Lily, who hugged Max tightly. For the first time in a long while, hope blossomed. Judge Monroe returned to his chambers alone, feeling the weight and responsibility of the decision ahead. He knew this case wasn't just about custody, it was about healing, protection, and understanding the language of love. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the courtroom as the final session of the custody hearing began. The tension that had gripped the room over the past days was now charged with a quiet anticipation. Everyone, attorneys, court staff, and observers, waited to hear Judge Monroe's decision. Lily sat beside her mother, Max lying peacefully at her feet. Her eyes were bright, filled with a fragile but growing confidence. Her fingers lightly traced patterns on Max's fur, a silent reassurance between them. Judge Monroe took the bench, his expression serious but calm. He cleared his throat and began. "This court has heard compelling testimony regarding the special bond between Lily and her dog, Max. It is clear that Max is not merely a pet, but a vital source of emotional support and communication for Lily. The evidence shows that Lily suffers from selective mutism, a condition that profoundly impacts her ability to engage verbally with the world." The judge paused, scanning the courtroom. In custody cases, the court's primary concern is the best interest of the child physically, emotionally and psychologically. Based on the evidence, this court finds that Lily's well-being is best served in the care of her mother, Rachel Turner, and that Max's presence is essential to her continued healing and development. Greg's face tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but Judge Monroe raised a hand to silence him. The court hereby grants full custody of Lily Turner to Rachel Turner, with the stipulation that Max remain a permanent part of Lily's life. This decision reflects not only the law, but the unique and profound relationship between a child and her loyal companion. A hush fell over the courtroom. Rachel exhaled, relief washing over her features. She leaned down, hugging Lily gently. Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, "We're going home." Lily smiled shyly and gave Max a small sign, a tap on his paw, followed by a gentle hug. Max wagged his tail, sensing the joy in the moment. Judge Monroe looked at Lily with a warm smile. "You have shown great courage, Lily. Remember, your voice, spoken or silent, has power. Keep being brave." As the courtroom began to clear, reporters scrambled to catch Rachel and Lily for comments. But Rachel declined, wanting to shield her daughter from the spotlight. Outside, the sun was shining brighter. Lily held Max's leash tightly as they walked to the waiting car. She looked up at her mother and whispered, "Thank you for fighting for me." Rachel smiled, her heart full. "Thank you for being so strong." Max trotted alongside them, a silent guardian and friend, ready to face whatever came next. The story of a little girl who found her voice through her dog had touched many hearts, a testament to the healing power of love and loyalty. Judge Monroe watched the courthouse steps from a distance, a rare smile lingering. Sometimes, justice was about more than laws written on paper. It was about listening to the quiet truths that could only be told through the language of the heart.